All right, let's get right into it, because today we are going to unpack a real scientific mystery. We're talking about a hidden flaw, something lurking deep inside the DNA of one of the most important crops on the entire planet. It's a story about a kind of genetic ghost that's been secretly holding back our food supply.
I mean, there's just no other way to put it. Maize, or as most of us call it, corn, is an absolute superstar. It is one of the biggest success stories in the entire history of farming. Over the last century, through some seriously brilliant breeding, we've turned this plant into a total productivity powerhouse.
And look at this number. Just take that in for a second. Since the year 1900, breeders have boosted maize productivity by 800%. That's not an 80% increase, that's an 8-fold increase. It's an almost unbelievable achievement that has helped feed billions of people.
But what if, for all that incredible success, there's a catch? A secret that corn has been carrying in its genetic code this whole time. A hidden burden that's been preventing it from reaching its absolute tippy-top potential. Well, that is the exact question we are digging into.
So, is maize really the modern miracle we think it is? Or is there maybe a little more to the story?
That's what a team of researchers at Cornell University and the USDA were wondering. Even with that mind-blowing 800% improvement, they just had this hunch that something was being missed, some kind of subtle, nagging drag on the plant's health that all of our modern breeding just hadn't been able to shake.
And that brings us to the prime suspects in our genetic whodunit. And we're not talking about some big, obvious, flashy mutation. Nope. The culprits here are much, much smaller.
They're called rare alleles. So what is that? Well, an allele is just a version of a gene, and a rare one is, well, rare. The analogy of a typo in a book is perfect. Most copies of the book are printed correctly, but every once in a while you find a little typo. In the world of genetics, most of these typos are super uncommon.
So here was the big idea, the central theory the researchers are working with. While maybe one of these little typos by itself doesn't do much, what happens when a plant accumulates hundreds or even thousands of them? The theory was that this pileup creates a genetic load, a burden that subtly damages the plant's overall health and fitness.
Okay, so to test this whole idea, the scientists needed to find the crime scene, the actual place where these rare alleles were doing their damage. And that led them to look at how the genes themselves were actually behaving.
They were looking for something called gene dysregulation. See, normally your genes are supposed to turn on and off in this really precise, controlled dance. Dysregulation is when that system just goes haywire. It's pure chaos. A gene might get cranked up to full blast and get stuck there, or it might barely turn on at all. The dimmer switch analogy is spot on. It's just broken.
And this is where they found the smoking gun. They studied hundreds and hundreds of different maize plants, and this incredibly clear pattern just jumped out at them. The plants with the most extreme gene activity, the ones that were either way too low or way too high, were the exact same plants that had the most rare alleles nearby. So let's be really clear about the takeaway here, because it's a big one. These rare genetic typos weren't harmless little quirks. Not at all. They were directly tied to that chaotic, disorganized gene activity. The more typos a plant had, the more chaos you'd find in its genes. And as they dug in, they found a couple more fascinating clues. It turned out these rare typos were much more likely to basically break a gene's on switch, causing it to produce less of whatever it was supposed to make. And just like how a typo at the very beginning of a sentence can mess up the whole thing, they found that a rare allele right at the start of a gene had the biggest disruptive effect.
But this just raises another question, right? If these rare alleles are so bad for the plant, why hasn't a whole century of intense modern breeding just gotten rid of them? Well, the answer, it turns out, is a ghost from maize's very distant past.
So check out this timeline. Maize started out as a super diverse plant down in the tropics, but as people started to domesticate it and move it into new, cooler climates, it went through what geneticists call a population bottleneck. Basically, only a small, limited sample of that original genetic diversity made it through the journey.
And this bottleneck had this really strange and totally unintentional side effect. Some alleles that had been super rare back in the big tropical population, well, just by random chance, they happened to be in the few plants that survived the move. So all of a sudden, these formerly rare and often kind of harmful alleles became way more common. And the researchers found that these specific bottleneck alleles have a huge, disproportionate, and disruptive effect on genes today.
Okay, so we have our suspects, these rare alleles. We have the crime scene, gene dysregulation. And we have the motive, that historical bottleneck. So now let's connect all of those dots to what really matters, the actual corn growing in the field.
And the causal chain became just crystal clear. The more rare alleles a plant was carrying around, the more its genes were thrown into chaos. And the more chaotic its genes were, the lower its overall fitness, which they measured by a super important trait, its seed weight. Basically, its yield.
In fact, the link was so strong, and this is amazing, that the researchers wrote in the journal Nature that they could literally predict how much grain a plant would produce just by measuring the amount of chaos in its gene activity. I mean, that is a direct line from tiny little typos in DNA all the way up to the global food supply.
So, with all the evidence laid out, it's time to deliver the final verdict on this hidden genetic drag.
And here's the bottom line. Despite a century of our best efforts to breed the perfect corn, we just haven't been able to shake these genetic ghosts. This hidden burden, this genetic load of rare, harmful alleles, is still there in modern maize, acting like a constant, invisible brake on its productivity.
So let's just recap the big takeaways here. First, we now know that a big pileup of rare genetic typos causes absolute chaos in a plant's gene activity. Second, a historical event, a population bottleneck, accidentally made these bad typos more common. Third, that genetic chaos is directly linked to lower crop yields. And finally, and maybe most importantly, even our best modern breeding techniques haven't been enough to get rid of this hidden drag.
And that leaves us with this one final, really fascinating thought. For decades, the name of the game in crop improvement has been about adding new, better genes. But what if this research points to a totally different strategy? What if the next great leap forward for agriculture isn't about adding something new, but about finally going back and cleaning up the ghosts of the past?